This is usually one of the busiest squares in town, with tourists and people in general. And as you can see, only the pigeons come to visit. Some people, however, disregard social distancing guidance while standing in line for food staples outside marketplaces amid an ongoing consumer goods shortage faced by the country.
Really think about food sovereignty for this country is to look at import dependency. And so I am going to go 30 days without eating anything made from wheat. 70% of all of what we eat in this country is imported. If we lost access to even half of that, it would mean food shortages nationwide and people would be real hangry. With a population of 1.4 million, we're importing 220 pounds of wheat per person per year. Now, if you exclude babies and small children who wouldn't eat as much wheat as an adult, we're talking about 300 pounds of wheat per year for some adults. Like, how much roti is that? And then, finally, the U.S. is our biggest trading partner. The phrase was coined by Via Campesina and brought to public debate during the World Food Summit in 1996. It is the people's, countries, or state unions' right to defend their agricultural and food policy without any dumping vis-a-vis third country. But I do know that the United States Department of Agriculture's subsidy program is quite broken, and wheat, soy, corn, and a handful of other crops get over-subsidized. Now, what that does is it creates low-cost surpluses. Instead of curtailing those surpluses by changing the subsidy policy, the United States Department of Agriculture then seeks markets outside the United States for those crops. So-called developing nations become the recipient markets for those crops. Either they are flooded with those commodities at very low prices, or they're just dumped as aid. It sounds at first blush like the United States is giving people an opportunity to get free or low-cost food, but what really ends up happening is a certain dependency starts to form, and local farmers can't sell what they grow to their own people.
Agricultural Society, JAS, says working with the 4-H movement, the society will be leading a move to create a national food production plan. This is expected to help stem any fallout from global disasters and emergencies like the current Covid-19 crisis.
Economist Dr. Andre Horton warning that a 3% contraction of the Jamaican economy could carry severe consequences for Jamaicans. He proposed small to large-scale farming of crops that need just a few months to reach maturity. This, he feels, could help with the demand that could come should imported goods remain unreliable.
Okay, my good friend and mentor, Sister Natalie Charles in Dominica. She's an herbalist and a longtime food activist, and she was a civil rights activist back in the day. She's so amazing. She sent me this article on the day that it was published on March 31st, a few days ago, and it talks about not only the threat, the lack of food sovereignty in the Caribbean has put the region in the world's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the potential opportunity that exists. So I'm going to give you a little scroll through the 5 ways that COVID-19 has changed what food insecurity looks like in the Caribbean by Daphne, Ewing, Chow. And this is a Forbes magazine, as you can see, article. Between 80 and 90% of all food consumed in the region originates from foreign countries. For most Caribbean countries, its primary food source is the United States. Why? The lens through which we have typically looked at food insecurity in the Caribbean has changed. The primary source of foreign exchange has temporarily dried up. This section talks about the fact that the tourism industry, travel and tourism, is a key economic driver and foreign exchange earner in the Caribbean, and that because tourism has ground to a halt because of border closures and travel restrictions, these countries are not having access or the ability to accumulate the foreign exchange of the currency that it needs to make the food purchases, feed their people through the purchases of imports. Number two is that the Caribbean is facing a potential socio-economic crisis. This is because locally in different Caribbean islands, just as in many of the other countries in the world, um, to not only has tourism stopped, but also a lot of people have been let go, retrenched, laid off. The closures of non-essential businesses has left people with less disposable income, lower incomes, and then also the closure of schools that resulted in children missing out on school feeding. Many of them get both breakfast and lunch at school, and often in some families, that is the only meal that they would get for the day. Those are the only meals that they would get. So number three is that the output from the United States could be impacted. Now, the USDA and the Food and Drug Administration there in the United States have posted the same exact text on their websites. It's in the USDA FAQs. It's on the FDA website that there are no disruptions in the food supply. There are no shortages. They're telling everybody it's going to be fine. We have plenty of food. We're a surplus country. Blah blah blah. But what those statements are doing is they're just trying to get people to stop panic buying. Okay, and I watched another report from CNBC saying, well, why the United States probably won't run out of food. The food supply will be impacted, not because of the amount of food that there is, but the ability to get that food to market because of labor force disruptions. That is the key reason why there will be interruptions. There will be shortage of labor in all areas of the supply chain, including production, imports, transportation, processing, and shipping. Next thing is that there could be a shutdown in exports. As workforce constraints cause a contraction in internal production, panic buyers empty supermarket shelves and import partners conserve their own food supplies. Some states could reduce or temporarily discontinue food exports so as to preserve their own food security, explains Pamela Koch-Hamilton, Director of International Trade and Commodities at the UNCTAD. Listen, as I told you over the weekend, Kazakhstan has already done that. They are probably not the only ones who've done that. Banned. So now if the Caribbean basin is relying on so heavily on imports for feeding, well, we have to change that thought process. Here was the last one. There are reduced markets for local agricultural outputs. Quarantines, border closures, food safety concerns, and temporary business closures caused by shelter-in-place orders have affected traditional markets for agricultural outputs such as food shops, restaurants, vendors, hotels, and airlines. In Jamaica, for example, the Treasure Beach Hydroponic Farm Group in St. Elizabeth, which invested just under $75,000 on its tomato harvest, of which 95% was destined for local hotels. Well, hotels are closed, aren't they? The tourism industry has completely ground to a halt. Anybody who has been relying on supplying food to the tourism industry, to cruise ships that are docking in your country, to hotels where tourists are coming from countries worldwide, we we don't have that anymore. So they're donating thousands of tons of tomatoes to government quarantine facilities. They're taking a hit. Now, this journalist highlights that this is potentially an opportunity in disguise, and I agree. I think it's a beautiful idea. Agricultural economists have argued that COVID-19 food security impacts could be a proverbial opportunity in disguise that could be mitigated through increased interregional trade. We don't know when international borders will open back up for the region, so we must look within, says Zachary Harding. And you know what? That's that's a cool way to look at things. And finally, as the region becomes more economically stable, it has an opportunity to invest in agricultural technologies that can enhance climate and crisis resilience and yields while minimizing reliance on limited arable land. I would love to focus on the Commonwealth of Dominica and how they came out of Hurricane Maria with a new commitment to enhance their climate resilience. The government, led by Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit there, took some very important measures that have started to position the Commonwealth of Dominica to be able to be more climate resilient. I believe that that kind of effective, visionary movement is what the Caribbean region needs. And if a tiny country like the Commonwealth of Dominica could do it, then I believe that it can be done in the entire region with such powerhouses as Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica as members of this region, Cuba as members of this region. We already do so much in cooperation with each other. Let's make this a time to make the Caribbean region more food sovereign, food secure for the population of this region. We need to be having these kinds of conversations where the food system is retooled and people take back control of their food and their health. This is Rashida Davis, Really Nourish. Stay safe and stay well fed.